Greetings. So welcome to another of this series that we have in sort of some foundations of economics and some linking tools. This one is called The Concept of Equilibrium Economics, and this one I'm trying to get across this is going to be a discussion about the unifying analytical tool that really underlies almost every economic model and sort of an additional way of thinking how an economist thinks. And then this is hopefully gives you a little bit of sort of a practical toolkit and a little bit of a sense of what it is we do in economics and how you can use that. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the main tool really that economists use is something called equilibrium. And so all of you know what the word equilibrium means. And equilibrium in economics refers to, it's really the way we organize all of our models. So underlying almost every economic model or concept is one of equilibrium. And to kind of help you think about why this might be, we want to think about what is the study of economics. Economics is really all about how we allocate scarce resources. And as a society, we would seek to allocate our scarce resources as best as possible. And this sort of underlies most of economics, is that we're looking for this thing that we would call the best allocation. And the bottom line, or the punchline of the joke in economics, as it were, is that the best allocation that we can achieve when we have scarce resources is where the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost. So the entire analytical framework of economics is really one that is based on this idea of equilibrium and this concept that we have of the marginal benefit equaling the marginal cost. And so that's really what we're talking about. So that's the key thing I want you to keep in mind and get out of this video lecture today, is that when the marginal benefit and marginal cost of any action or choice are equal, then the best use of resources are achieved. And going back to some of the things that we had talked about earlier on in terms of philosophy and economics being a study in the moral philosophy, that's where we kind of get into this, because we're going to make the conclusion, as it were, that where the costs are equal to the benefits, this is where we're as good off as we can possibly be. This is underlined by quite a few philosophical concepts. So really what we're going to do is we're going to always be looking for the equilibrium point in any system. And in economics, where you have an equilibrium point, that's where you're going to want to be, and that's what you're looking for as an analyst. And so we're always going to try to identify the relevant costs and the relevant benefits, and then we're going to be setting them equal. And this can be of any course of action, any policy, anything that you might want to analyze, from how many scoops of ice cream to have on a given day, to what to do on a pleasant spring afternoon, to how to allocate government resources, how to cut taxes sensibly. Anything is really looking at the cost versus the benefit. In the healthcare field, this also applies. If you need to decide whether you want to go to the doctor or what level of treatment that you want, you really need to evaluate the risks and the benefits, and that would be the costs and the benefits of any given action. And in order to try to optimize the things that we want to do and get the most out of limited resources, we want to set them equal. And as always in everything economics, we're really looking at the margin of things. And remember, the margin is sort of that concept of the opportunity cost. It's the next thing that we need to do. The sunk cost, what is past, what is behind us, and it doesn't matter. We have to think about what it is we're going to do in the next time and the next resource decision choice. So maximizing the benefit from the use of scarce resources is how we optimize social well-being. And that's sort of a fundamental precept of economics, and I hope that you kind of see that filter through everything else in this lecture. So equilibrium is just the basic concept from algebra and from math, where we have two things that are equal to each other, hence equilibrium, and a system is in stasis, it's steady. And so nothing is going to change. Once we reach equilibrium, there has to be an outside force that comes in and changes things. So the system kind of settles down to this particular point. So when you're looking at this and trying to solve a problem, you're going to be looking at where two functions are equal, where two graphs intersect, where a cost and a benefit are equal at the margin. So basically another way you could say that is you want to set, equal, and solve. So the key concept, and really what you're doing in all of economics, regardless of the type of problem that you're trying to solve, is that you're going to identify a key concept. And this is the key concept right here, is you're going to identify a cost, you're going to identify a benefit, and you're going to set them equal to each other at the margin. That's it. That's economics. So there you go, in a nutshell. So another way that we can look at this, so when we look at equilibrium, we're thinking about some of the standard models that you're likely to run across in a principles class or anywhere throughout your undergraduate Life in economics, most of what we look at is we try to keep it down to two variables and we try to keep it linear. And that's just because it makes it tractable for us to do what we're doing. So one way we can look at that is that we look at a downward sloping curve, and this is usually what you guys most of the time will see as demand. But something to kind of help you think about is you run across different models and you kind of think they're related, but you're not exactly sure. They are related because, again, we have benefits, and we usually have something like this where it's going to be downward sloping. We have costs. And then what we do is we just set them equal to each other. And that's how we solve any particular problem. So the benefits go by different names. We can call them marginal willingness to pay, we can call it a marginal benefit, or we can call it demand. These really refer to the same type of concept. And keep in mind, you might ask yourself, why, if we know we're looking at a benefit, is it downward sloping? Well, typically because as we sort of run into things like diminishing marginal returns, and so on the demand side or the benefit side, the more and more you consume of something, the less you get from any particular unit of consumption. And so, when we go back to the shape of the utility curve and some other things like that, we kind of see why demand is downward sloping. And demand is just the benefit that we get from consumption. It's just one name for it, and that's what I want to get across, is that when you're looking at what we get from any particular action, we want to categorize things as a benefit or a cost. And in all of economics, that's what you're doing. You want to identify your benefits, identify your costs. So some of the other names that costs go by are a minimum willingness to accept, or a marginal willingness to accept, a marginal cost, or supply. And so for our costs, they're usually upward sloping. And so this is an example of a linear supply curve. And you might ask yourself, well, why are costs upward sloping? And again, it's because we have diminishing returns. So for any particular unit that we, if this is quantity down here on these axes, and we have price on the vertical axis in this case, then what you're looking at is that as you use more and more and more and more of an input, you're getting less and less out of it, and it's costing you more. So you have increasing marginal costs. And so that's why you have an upward sloping supply curve, and the supply curve is just the marginal cost curve. Then what we do in order to solve any particular economic problem is we look to the equilibrium solution. Now the equilibrium solution is where the things are going to be equal, hence the word equilibrium. So it should be pretty straightforward. And so I lost my pen. So here we have the supply curve, here we have the demand curve. Where they intersect, right here, is where they're equal, and that would be the equilibrium point. And so once they intersect there, you'll have an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity. And to kind of help you think about this in the bigger terms, so the price is really a cost, right? And the quantity down here is really some way of measuring the benefit. And so this will come back again because we can introduce concepts of consumer and producer surplus, which are based on this type of concept. So the benefit that's gained from consumption is related to this demand curve here, or this marginal benefit curve. And in any other place than where the two intersect, there's going to be a tendency in the market for things to move it back up to that point. So if the two curves are not intersected, what's going to happen is that there's going to be pressure on things to have, because there's pressure in the system for things to move back up to that equilibrium point. This is the place where the market is going to want to stabilize at, and that's why we call it equilibrium. Another thing to keep in mind about equilibrium is that this is exactly where the benefit and the cost are equal to each other, and it's the best allocation of resources that we can get. So here's some examples of some different ways that this concept of equilibrium and marginal benefit equaling marginal cost, some different ways that it can look. And I wanted to show you this because it's really the exact same problem. So this panel over here, this is going to be an aggregate supply curve. This is going to be an aggregate demand curve. So this would, and down here is going to be output, or GDP, in the economy. So this would be your long-run equilibrium output for an economy. And you'll notice that equilibrium is given where the two sides of the market, or the two sides of the problem, intersect, where your costs and your benefits at the margin are equal in the long run. So this is another example. This one here could be some type of producer cost on a society-wide basis. And this one here could be a PPF, production possibility frontier. And then here you have a budget line. And so what you're seeing here is some type of cost and some type of benefit. And the solution to the problem, where the best allocation of resources occurs over time, is going to be exactly there where all the curves intersect. This is another one here. You could look at this as being total revenue. This one could be a total cost. These could be related to a profit function, for example. And so where you have an intersection point here, and then you also have where you can maximize your profit. So if the distance between your total cost and your total revenue is profit, so here you're maximizing profit, and so that's one of the ways that we can look at it, and we can say where the marginal benefit and the marginal cost are equals, where we maximize our revenue. And so if this function right here is the total revenue curve, if we take the derivative of it, we get the marginal revenue curve. And if we take the derivative of the total cost curve, we get a marginal cost curve. And so that's the marginal cost. This is the marginal revenue. And where the marginal cost is equal to the marginal revenue, we would maximize profit. And so in this case, where the slopes of these two things are equal, is where we maximize our profit. So that's another way that that can look. One more quick example I wanted to provide is this one here. These would be cost functions, and this would be a demand curve. So here you have your marginal cost, here you have an average cost, average variable cost. Here's your demand curve, where the demand and supply are equal, which is to say where the marginal cost and the marginal benefit, so supply equal demand, marginal cost equal marginal benefit, is where we have our optimal output and price in the economy. Okay, so to provide a short conclusion, so in economics we look at the equilibrium, and in order to analytically determine an optimal allocation of scarce resources, there's basically just three basic steps to solving a problem. We want to identify all of the costs of whatever set of choices we're looking at, and then we want to calculate the marginal cost. Then the second step is we want to try to identify all the benefits of whatever decision or allocation, in this case I call it, and then calculate the marginal benefit. And then we want to set the marginal benefit equal to the marginal cost and solve for the set of variables of interest. So if we're looking at demand and supply, demand is going to be the benefits that we're looking at, supply is going to be equal to the costs. And so we want to look at basically the slope of the demand function, the slope of the supply curve, set them equal to each other and solve. And this is basically, set equal and solve is kind of the story of economics. And so hopefully kind of seeing a broader view of how the various models come together and what the underlying analytical tool is will help you when you're studying, because it's really, once you can get that basic concept down of identifying the benefits and identifying the costs, after that you can go about just going through the mathematics or through the graphing to come up with the answer. It helps give you sort of a guidepost or a direction or a map to what you're doing. And in decision making in life, I think this is really important, and this is why for me economics is so important, and how it sort of changes, and when I was an undergraduate, how it changed how I really thought of the world, because it's really sort of thinking about every decision that we're going to make. We need to think about what is it we do next, and how do we do the best that we can given where we're at. So it doesn't really matter how I got to the particular fork in the road. I need to decide which way to take. And the way I should take should depend on my perceived evaluation of the benefits and the costs of any given action. And when we do that, we can allocate what we've been given, what we have, to the best of our abilities. And we do that where the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost.